The true enemy of the American people is not China or any other foreign nation. Although the United States does have foreign enemies, and these enemies cannot be overlooked, the real enemy of the American people is, first and foremost, its central bank, known as the Federal Reserve. We've always stated that the backbone of America is its middle class, this social group of men and women who wake up every day to produce the goods and services that make the United States the most advanced nation on the surface of the earth. And yet, this social group that maintains America's economic strength has been considerably depleting for the last 5 decades. The entity responsible for the depletion of the American middle class is the Federal Reserve. Let me explain this statement. The Federal Reserve is the monetary authority responsible for monitoring the national economy. Since its creation in 1913, it has been mandated to stabilize prices and maximize employment. Hence, the Federal Reserve uses a set of complex monetary policy tools to achieve these two goals. The use of these tools, however, clearly epitomizes government intervention in the economy, a concept that slows genuine economic progress. Prior to 1971, the American middle class was large and strong. Most American households could live and sustain on one income, and the prices of goods and services were far more affordable. That's because prior to 1971, the U.S. economy was tied to the gold standard. The essential characteristic of the gold standard is that it prevented inflation from occurring. Since the government is the only entity that creates inflation, it could not spend at will under the gold standard. Its spending was limited to the amount of gold available in the central bank's reserve. Since inflation was low during the gold standard, the middle class had a strong purchasing power. Everything changed in 1971 when President Richard Nixon decided to take the United States off the gold standard and to base the entire economy on fiat currency. The problem with fiat currency is that it is based on nothing tangible and valuable. It is based on government bonds, and these bonds are promissory notes indicating that the government promises to pay back its debt. In other words, money had become debt. The fundamental purpose for abandoning the gold standard was to loosen the government's ability to spend unrestrainedly. Since government could now spend without any constraints, the Federal Reserve dramatically increased the money supply by augmenting its quantity and velocity. Now, how has this been affecting the middle class? And how has it been contributing to its shrinking? Since money is no longer tied to a commodity, but to political will, the only way to stimulate the economy was to print more of it. And money printing created what we call the Cantillon effect, and the Cantillon effect engineered the shrinking of the middle class. The Cantillon effect is the uneven redistribution of wealth through inflation once the central bank injects money into the economy to stimulate it. When the Federal Reserve injects money into the economy to stimulate its growth, the price of assets first increases and creates asset bubbles, but the price of goods and services has not yet increased. The first recipients of this pool of money are the government, publicly traded corporations, large private corporations, financial institutions, and extremely wealthy individuals and families. They get richer since the value of their money is tied to their investments, paper assets, businesses, real estate, and commodities. Then, the second recipients of this money injected into the economy are middle-size and small business owners. Once they receive that money, they start increasing the price of goods and services in order to anticipate consumer demand. As people will feel richer, they will tend to spend more. To ensure that businesses maintain their level of profitability, they have no choice but to increase prices. Then the last recipients to receive that injected money are the middle class, mainly composed of full-time and part-time workers. By the time they receive that injected money, the prices of assets, goods, and services have already increased, thus triggering inflation. As a result, the purchasing power of the middle class decreases and the value of money wanes. Since the U.S. economy is no longer tied to the gold standard, the cost of living has dramatically increased. Indeed, between 1971 and 2024, household income grew by 700%, from $10,290 in 1971 to $81,000 in 2024. While at the same time the stock market grew by 5,700% during that very same period, and the prices of goods and services have skyrocketed much faster than incomes. Moreover, the value of investments has risen faster than the prices of goods and services. As a result, the cost of living has dramatically skyrocketed, and now, most households in America need at least 2 incomes to live off. What in fact triggered this rapid increase in the cost of living is government spending. Indeed, government spending has drastically augmented since the economy is no longer tied to gold. The Federal Reserve is the entity supplying the funds to the government for its various yet wasteful expenditures. Hence, government spending increased the cost of living through inflation and crowding out the private sector spending. And this is why the American middle class is on the verge of disappearing, and the Federal Reserve is responsible for that. Lastly, it is important to address a major component about the Federal Reserve and central banks in general. This component is how the Federal Reserve runs our economy and how they affect the middle class. In the credit-based system, government is no longer constrained. It can increase its spending as much as it wants, and the central bank can loan as much money to government by printing as much as it wants. The problem is that it enables the orchestration of a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is a fraudulent system that involves paying existing investors in a non-existent enterprise with the funds collected from new investors. Ponzi schemes are doomed to fail because instead of using the money collected from the new investors to create wealth and using that income from the wealth created to pay back old investors, it uses that money directly to pay out old investors. As a result, the person running the scheme is forced to keep attracting new investors to his fraud in order to pay out the old investors. Eventually, the scheme falls apart because there are no new investors, and the new investors who came in are now old investors and claim their money back. Thus, how do governments and central banks operate legalized Ponzi schemes on ordinary people? The credit-based system allows the government to borrow as much money as it wants from the central bank by issuing bonds to it. The central bank then sells these bonds at an auction to other central banks, financial institutions, and individuals. Government pays its obligations back by borrowing even more money. Thus, it uses new loans to pay back old loans, the same the promoter of a Ponzi scheme uses new investors' money to pay back old investors. The new loan issued to pay back the old loan erodes the purchasing power of the consumer, because any additional currency injected into the economy depreciates the value of the existing currency in circulation. As a result, the government does not create wealth since the money it borrows is used to pay back old loans, and as the new loan becomes an old loan, it has to keep borrowing from the central bank to pay back that old loan. This then becomes a vicious cycle. Since the credit-based system is an unchecked system that grants the federal government unlimited power over the money supply, the result is constant inflation pressures over the quantity of goods and services being produced. And this logically depletes the purchasing power of the middle class. The middle class shrinks as a result of that.